Hello, we are working on skill 7. This is all about making a placket for our button-up shirt. Very similar to skill 6, you have to sew at least 2 plackets, okay? One of your plackets will be for your skill sample grade. The second placket will be for your shirt grade. Now, if you are sewing a long sleeve shirt, you can just sew both of the plackets on your shirt. Show me after you do the first one and I'll give you feedback before you do the second. If you are, for whatever reason, and I've given you the okay, if you're doing a short sleeve button-up shirt, you still have to sew 2 plackets, okay? But you can do them like this, where you just sew it on a scrap of fabric. Okay, this is an example of what your placket is going to look like when it's finished. This obviously doesn't have the cuff sewn onto it yet, and it's on just a scrap of fabric, but this is usually on the bottom of the sleeve on the back side near the cuff, and it allows the cuff to be unbuttoned and open up so you can get your arm actually in the sleeve. Okay, it looks really smooth and clean, and I think you'll be really impressed with yourself after you sew it. But this is what it looks like on the outside. You'll notice that it's got this sort of like kind of house looking shape at the top. I've got some really neat edge stitching around it. When I open it up, there is a narrower strip of the placket underneath. And when I look at the wrong side of it, it is still very much nicely finished, but you can see a little bit of top stitching here. What you'll notice here is that there are no raw edges, okay? Obviously there's a raw edge here, but once you get the cuff sewn here and here, there will no longer be raw edges. So that is the ultimate goal of this placket, is to get all your raw edges enclosed. All right, let's get started. Now I am sewing this on just a scrap of fabric, but you are going to have your sleeve cut out already and you'll be doing it here. Remember, I'm showing just one example, but you will have a left and a right placket, and you will also have a left and a right sleeve. So be very mindful of that as you're going to sew these together. Make sure that you are getting the placket orientated correctly on the correct sleeve. Okay. All right, so I have my placket pattern piece cut out, and this is mimicking my sleeve. Obviously there would be a sleeve cap up here, but just pretend like this is my sleeve. You should have 4 dots on your sleeve, and they should be down near the bottom of your sleeve, but focused more to one side. So you have a wider side of your sleeve and a narrower side around the dots. Your placket pattern should also have 4 dots. I went ahead and used a marking tool to connect all my dots. So I have sort of this 3-sided box, okay? So the first thing you're gonna do is I want you to find the right side of your placket and face it on the wrong side of your sleeve. Now, when you do this, the side of your placket that looks kind of like a house should be on the wider side of your sleeve. There should be more sleeve on this side that looks like a house. There should be less sleeve on this side, the smaller side of your placket, okay? And remember, right side of the placket on the wrong side of your sleeve. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna line up the 4 dots on your placket with the 4 dots on your sleeve. Now you should also have some notches down here near the bottom of your sleeve and the bottom of your placket that are also going to align, okay? So hopefully you can see those. One really great way to make sure you are aligning this properly is I'm going to poke a needle through one of the dots on my placket, and I make sure that it goes right through the dot on my sleeve as well. Okay, and I'll do the same thing down here. We'll poke my needle through a dot on my placket and then make sure that it goes through the dot, the corresponding dot on my sleeve. Okay, so you have, that is how you get your placket pinned onto your sleeve. The next step I want you to do is I want you to start down here at the edge, and you are going to be sewing a 3-sided box that's going to kind of connect all of these dots, okay? So you're going to start here and backstitch, and I want you to sew up through that dot all the way to this dot. Put your needle down right on that dot, pivot your fabric, stitch over to this dot, needle down, pivot fabric, and sew all the way down through that dot until you get to the edge and backstitch again. So you'll be sewing a 3-sided box. When you get done with that, it should look like this 3-sided box with a backstitch and a backstitch, okay? Now, if you need help making sure that these are straight lines, you can do what I did and use a marking tool and a ruler to give yourself visual guidelines that you can stitch on, okay? But you should get to this point. The next thing I want you to do is we're going to clip through both layers, okay? And you're going to clip right through the middle, stop about a ½ inch down, and then you're going to clip a Y shape up to each of those corners. Once you're done clipping it, you should see that it's clipped up through the very middle, and then you stopped clipping up through the middle about ½ an inch down, and then you clip right up to, but not through, that dot. But get very close to it. Same thing on this side. Clip diagonally up to, but not through that dot, okay? So you should have a bit of a triangle here up at the top, okay? The next step that we're going to do is we are going to take this placket and you are going to shove it through that hole and bring it out the other side, okay? Now, once you've got to this step, you should be looking at the right side of both of your fabrics, okay? That's how we know we've done it correctly. Now, we're going to be doing a lot of pressing now, okay? So ultimately, I hope you can kind of envision that we want to press it really nicely so that we have sort of this negative space in between where we stitched. And the way that you can do that really nicely is to like fold back the big side, put your iron down to hold your shirt down, pull the big side of the placket over, and press the seam allowances over towards the placket, okay? Use steam if you need. That makes it easier so that when you come to press this, you're able to kind of slide it so that seam is right on the edge, okay? And then press that side again very nicely so that seam is right on the edge, okay? I'm going to press the top of that kind of 3-sided box. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here where I fold back the small side of my placket, put my iron down to hold down the shirt, and I'm going to pull this over. That really opens up the seam that we just stitched, and then we can press the seam allowances towards that placket. Then when we go to pull this back, we're able to just slide it so that that seam is right on the edge. That makes for a very nice, clean work, okay? So press, press, steam, steam, steam. Now, if you're noticing that you're getting puckers up here, kind of a lot of waviness, and you're not able to press it flat, it means you need to go back and clip a little bit closer to your stitching right at those corners. Don't clip through your stitching, clip to it, but not through it, okay? So this is what it should look like when we're done pressing. It should be a nice, kind of even, consistently sized negative space. And this is what it should look like on the back. I really shouldn't be able to see much of that placket fabric on this side, and I really shouldn't be able to see much of the shirt fabric peeking out on this side. So the next step we are going to do here is we're going to deal with the small side of the placket first, okay? I want you to fold that back, just kind of lay it nicely like that. And we're going to take this long edge of the placket and we're going to turn it under by 1/4 of an inch, okay? And the way that you can tell that you're doing it correctly, I really want you to be accurate on this step. The more accurate you are with your pressing, your measurements, the easier it will be to get this placket sewn correctly, okay? So I want you to put your little marker on your seam gauge at 1/4 of an inch, okay? This is 1 inch. This is 1/2 an inch right here. This is 1/4 inch. Okay, so the second little line on your seam gauge. For your marker at 1/4 of an inch, I want you to turn this to the wrong side 1/4 of an inch. And you're gonna go along and you're gonna measure and you're gonna make sure that you're turning it under 1/4 of an inch. Be careful. You can always, there's a lot of really finicky pressing that goes on this placket. If you need to use your seam ripper or a kind of like a screwdriver to hold it down so that your fingers don't get burned, you can absolutely do that. Okay? But make sure you're actually turning it under 1/4 of an inch. It will not go well for you if you don't make sure. Okay. So again, I got this turned under 1/4 of an inch. Now we're gonna take this beautifully folded edge right here. We're gonna push our seam allowances towards our placket, and we're gonna make it so that this folded edge just covers that stitch line, okay? I don't want it going way far over, and I don't want it showing that stitch line. I want it just covering that stitch line. Now, do you see what's starting to happen here? If you pressed and you measured properly, the small side of your placket should be kind of filling in that negative space that we had, okay? Ah, that is gorgeous. That is what we want to see, okay? So again, we pressed under 1/4 of an inch. We made sure that this folded edge just covered that seam line. And now it should be filling in that negative space nicely. I want you to go in and I want you to backstitch and edge stitch all the way down this long side and then backstitch again. And get really nice and consistent and close to that folded edge, okay? So you're kind of enclosing all these raw edges within there, all right? Once that's done, it should look like this. You got a nice, consistent edge stitch all the way down that edge. Next up, what we're gonna do is we are going to deal with this side of the placket. Now, what you're going to be doing is you are going to be folding that back again like this. I just kind of pulled it back. You want to make sure your seam allowances are going towards the placket. Now you are going to be folding under this long edge and these two diagonal edges. I want you to fold them under 1/4 of an inch each, okay? Once you are done, this is what it should look like. You should have this long edge folded under 1/4 of an inch. You should have this diagonal edge folded under 1/4 of an inch and this diagonal edge folded under 1/4 of an inch. Again, you're probably gonna wanna use some sharp pokey thing to kind of hold these edges down as you press because it can get really small and finicky, and if you don't want to burn your fingers, use something to hold it down. You definitely want to utilize your seam gauge. I want to see that these are definitely folded under 1/4 of an inch, okay? All the way up and down, very consistent. After you got those edges folded, the next thing you're gonna do is you're gonna take this folded edge and you want it to just cover this stitch line, okay? You are going to press, press, press. Now look at how clean and smooth that looks, okay? Are you starting to see it come together? This is sort of, our placket is almost finished. Now, before we go and stitch this, I really want you to pay attention to, do you like the diagonal on here? Is it kind of even and consistent from one side to the other? Does it look symmetrical? That's what we're going for. If it's not, just fold this back and kind of zhuzh it a little bit. But ultimately, this is where we want to be, okay? The next step is going to be to stitch this. Now, if we go back to our finished example, we started stitching down here. We're going up the long edge, diagonal, diagonal, down a little bit, and then all the way across, and then back stitch, okay? And that kind of helps get all of our raw edges enclosed. Now, how do we know how far to come down and do the diagonal part? I want you to open your placket up. And right where it stops opening up, I want you to put a pin or something, put a little chalk mark, something, okay? To tell yourself that that's where the opening ends, okay? So we got our pin right here. So when you go to your machine, you're gonna start stitching right here. You're gonna back stitch. So edge stitch all the way up this edge, diagonal, diagonal, down to the pin, and then stitch across and back stitch. Now, every time you come to a corner, you're gonna put your needle down, press your foot up, pivot your fabric. Same thing, needle down, press your foot up, pivot your fabric. Your needle is what is holding your spot in your project so you don't have a broken seam line, okay? So every time you go to pivot, put your needle down in the fabric, press your foot up, pivot, so needle down, press your foot up, pivot, so same thing, okay? Keep going. So all the way up this long edge, diagonal, diagonal, down and across. Now, when you're doing this, I don't want your placket pulled out like this. I want it overlapped very nicely, but as you're going up this long edge, you need to make sure you're not catching this guy underneath, okay? As long as you've done it properly, you should be fine, but something to keep in mind. Make sure that that isn't getting pulled over and gonna get caught, because then you won't be able to open up your placket, okay? So once you have that sewn, it should look something like this. It's beautiful, it's very finished, all your raw edges are enclosed around the entire thing. And the last step, before you go to sew on, you'll continue on sewing your shirt and you'll eventually sew a cuff along the bottom edges. But before you do that, I want you to go and trim these lower edges. If you notice that one side is longer than the other, I just want you to trim it so that this edge, and this edge are in alignment so that your cuff, when you sew it on, will be in alignment as well, okay? So if one of these sides is longer than the other, now is the time to trim it, okay? Good job, you've sewn your first placket. Keep it up.